In Jiu-Jitsu, they say rolling with a white belt is dangerous because sometimes they can do wild things that catch you by surprise, and such is the case, I think, with this particular game here. A player called World Beater, who I'm not familiar with, I think is relatively new to the multiplayer scene. You can let us know down in the comments below, is up against Ice Power, who is, of course, an experienced tournament player, but this is in more of a casual setting. This was on a Tournament Hill stream a few weeks ago on my channel. And yeah, he's got Tomb Kings into Lizardmen here. Now, I do say casual because looks like Ice Power has forgotten to take a caster, which is just fine. He's got Cleated and Necrotech, 3 Necropolis Knights, some Chariots up front, along with Nakar Horsemen, and some Skeleton Warriors to back them up. The unexpected sort of wild, flying kick here, so to speak. Is not that that's allowed in Jiu-Jitsu, but anyway. 2 Sacred Croc scores led by Nakai. You've also got Lore of Beasts here, fairly solid. Some Saurus Warriors, Pink Cohort with Jabs, and Cold One Spear Riders. I just wanted to do this replay again because World Beater was asking about it, and I wanted to kind of talk about what he did here that was successful, why it was successful, and some potential problems he could have with this build in a more, competitive sense. But Chariots coming forward, they're going to do some great shock damage initially. Nice little counteraction, though, with the Sacred KROXIs with their nice magic damage. Of course, if he had brought a caster with indication of protection, that is Ice Power here, of course, that physical resistance would get cut through by the magic damage. But in general, that high AP going to come in and generally do a pretty good job here. There's also a big debuff. That upgraded Curse Von Rare is going to significantly impact the melee stats of everything here. If we look like these 2 Necropolis Knights fighting against the Cold One Riders that are down, 21 to 22 attack and defense, so pretty brutal stuff. On the other side here, the Chariots are having a little bit of a hard time against Saurus. Saurus mass is so strong, especially with the Croc scores kind of mixed in here. The Chariots, you can see their models kind of getting bogged down, generally having a tough time. If we pop back over to Kalita here, you can see a Tomb Strike active is going to cause these Cold One Spear Riders to Terror Route. But again, the Croc scores providing quite a bit of mass against the Chariots. That combined again with the fact that Saurus are some of the heaviest infantry in the game just by sheer weight. They can hold back those Chariots relatively well. Nakai might get singled out in the center here, though. He's got to be a little bit careful. That heavy AP poison damage from the Necropolis Knights do pretty decently, and Restore being popped. I learned this actually myself in this cast. I didn't realize. I thought the Necropolis Knights still counted as undead, but in fact they do have the Construct tag. Can be healed by the Necrotech, but for the time being, just staying tight with these Croc scores and fighting on top of these infantry, not getting overextended is super important, right? Because the mass is the big thing here. Nakai also comes in and provides perfect vigor with his item here. It's going to be very beneficial. A lot of newer players don't realize just how important vigor actually is, and the fact that, especially these Sacred Croc scores, but really everything in that area of effect is fighting at perfect vigor. You can see already Fleet is starting to get drained here. A lot of the undead forces starting to get pretty tired, or diminished, if you will. And that is going to impact their melee performance significantly, right? Sacred Croc scores here, though, just about lost support. I mean, the Cohort of Sotek doing a great job providing a little bit of poison, and of course they're unbreakable, so they'll continue fighting to the bitter end. But over here, looks like Kalita is able to solo out the Lore of Beast caster. Already used up quite a bit of Winds of Magic on that big Curse Von Rare earlier, but Nakai is going to try and get over there. Kalita staying away. Ice Power doing his best to try and stay mobile and just clean up whatever tattered targets he can out in the periphery, understanding that the Sacred Croc score is fighting on top of the Saurus here. This is going to be a pretty tough nut to crack. He didn't really bring any anti-large AP. Yeah, he has the AP of the Necropolis Knights, and with Cycle Charging they could do pretty well, but in sustained combat, even though they have better actual sustained combat stats than the Sacred Croc scores, again, that vigor difference is going to be so important as all these units start to get drained, and as all the Sacred Croc scores can fight kind of a box around Nakai. Again, the Saurus are pretty important too. Saurus have heavy weapon damage overall, even if it's not primary AP, just high overall damage, right? With 18 AP, which is still very solid. So the combination of these two units fighting together is just going to be a lot for the Necropolis Knights to deal with, especially given their limited model count, but very appropriate thematic too. Kind of the Sneck Knight lady against the Croc Score bro, each with their signature units in tow. Very, very fun stuff. I know Fleet is kind of a range lord too, but Primal Roar also gets popped here. That's going to be huge. More physical resistance, and of course, extra melee attack up to 77 melee attack. And alongside that Perfect Vigor, that is going to be pretty nasty engagement for these Necropolis Knights. Again, they definitely want to cycle charge, but Cleated takes a hit here, pops the curse. It's kind of like a little bit of a budget Final Transmutation there. Once she goes down below half HP, it does hit a lot of units here, and is going to do quite a bit of HP damage, but you can see the Necropolis Knights just struggling here. Miasma of Despair also popped, kind of debuffing their leadership and speed, removing even more vigor. So Debilitated is the equivalent for Undead of Exhausted, right? So all these units that are showing Debilitated, armor, melee defense, speed, a whole bunch of stats, honestly, are significantly reduced. And as a result, they're really just going to struggle in this sustained combat, especially against somebody that has Perfect Vigor like Nakai, who you can see they're really not making good contact with at all. He's barely taken any damage. Gets back to the support of his KROXI bros, as he was getting bullied by those mean Snake Knights a little bit there. But Lita is going to try and hunt him down if she can, but there's just so many angry Lizardmen left. A few Cold One Speed Riders getting cleaned up by Necropolis Knights there. Really not much infantry, but even just having like this one source infantry to fight on top of, in general, it's pretty important. Normally you don't want units fighting on top of each other, infantry and cavalry wise. With monsters though, and that includes monsters infantry, you really do want them fighting on top of infantry as much as you can. The infantry will help absorb some of the hits. They'll kind of get in extra little chip hits here and there on the side. They can kind of filter in under the kneecaps and like between the legs sometimes of the big monstrous infantry, right? So utilizing them together, Crypt Horrors with skeletons, Rock Scores are an interesting one, but using them on top of Skinks, or obviously Saurus especially, you can see how a couple of the Croc Scores get tossed, but largely they're able to just hold firm and, keep from getting charged. The Saurus do rout here. Ends up being quite close, but Nakai, just so much HP left at this point. That Vigor difference, you can see this second Croc Score basically taking no damage. The other one has taken significant damage, but in that late game, was able to, again, hold firm. So, wonderful game. Good game to both players, honestly. And yeah, this is what can happen. Experienced, tournament-winning player like Ice Powers can sometimes get caught by surprise, especially when you're just having fun. He'd won several games in a row on the King of the Hill and had pretty much secured the victory anyway, so why not have a little bit of a good time? But I will say, from a build perspective, World Beater probably would have had some issues with a more competitive Tomb Kings build. Like, this is definitely fun, and there's some good sort of elements here, like I talked about. The mass, having the Croc Scores fight on top of the Source Warriors with shields, their heavy weapon damage, the magic damage situationally can be pretty useful as well in this matchup. But in general, it's relatively narrow, and I think, obviously, not having Caster is a big one. Khalid is okay, but you straight up just swap her out for Arcan in this build, start Spirit Leeching the Sacred Croc Scores, or maybe even Nakai himself, and dropping those Skeleton Summons, and I think this build actually probably works pretty decently here. Of course, there's no range tools as well. You could just straight up cut one of these Necropolis Knights for a unit who shop to Great Bows. That's going to make these Sacred Croc Scores pretty sad. Shop Great Bows are generally a very strong unit, so putting pressure on Lizardmen large armored monsters is one clear role for them in this matchup. So those are a few units I think that could potentially cause this build problems for World Beater, but it's definitely fun. Guys, somewhat of a meme, but that Perfect Vigor AoE, I think really people are starting to realize how strong it actually is. Again, the reason Sigvald is so strong, you've seen recently on this channel, him just absolutely carrying games, is that Perfect Vigor. So, it's a decent one to use. If you are going to use Nakai, it can be relatively expensive to try and take the Oracle alongside him, but it does offer you, Earthblood and Harmonic Conversions, both of which synergize reasonably decently with him. Of course, you could also take additional healing with the Rev Crystal if you really want to, but again, against somebody like Tomb Kings, whose Shopti Great Bows are pretty big danger in this matchup, and you may even see the rare Bone Giant as well here, which, if they make contact, they will do a ridiculous amount of damage to any large armored targets, so just be aware of that. These are going to be the two most dangerous sort of units to that particular combination. Necrosphinx, again, somewhat rare in this matchup, but you do occasionally see them fight lizard monsters. You would have to be aware of that as well. And just in general, I mean, Tomb Kings can go wide with a big line of archers here, right? And that, especially with the armor sundering of the Blessed Legion, can be fairly dangerous to the Skink Oracle as well. But Nakai synergizes well with the Oracle in general, and not to say that you shouldn't take the Skink Priest, that big, Curse of Onrare, considering how little you actually pay for the Skink Priest. Like, if you were to just take Flock of Doom and Curse of Onrare, that's very little spend for a caster, so you can go with a little bit of a bigger army, but just kind of depends on what you want to do. Kai, with his full kit, is relatively expensive, so I would say it's probably worth it to also invest in some healing. Kind of depends on what you think your opponent's going to do. Again, those ranged pressure tools from Tomb Kings are pretty important. Something to keep in mind. Hopefully you guys enjoyed that. If you like this sort of content, be sure to like, subscribe, hit that bell notification button. Warhammer 3's release is only a month away, so be sure to subscribe, hit that bell if you want to, again, see Warhammer 3 content. Thanks again. We'll see you next time.